Kumas.
It was not recording.
Okay. Kumas say mitzvah chadash shlo yisem mechui b'pachas mikain. So the Gemara in Chulin learns this din of that you have to give Rashis Agez from this story. Now, I want to, Abigail, we've already said, is one of the Sheva Nevios, one of the seven, we mentioned her as one of the seven prophetesses that mentioned, we only had seven who were Zocha to have things written, their Nevuah written for posterity. Now, we see in many of Abigail's actions and words a lot of wisdom. So notice she placed them on chamoirim, multiple donkeys. So the Meforshim point out this was not a huge amount of food. A donkey is a beast of burden, could have schlepped even one donkey. But she wanted to make the gift look bigger in order to calm David down. By the way, we see the Kli Yakar says the same thing. When Yaakov Avinu sent the mincha to Esav, he did the same trick. He could have loaded all his things on even less animals, but by showing more animals, it calmed Esav down. It showed, I'm getting a really good gift. So again, I think we start seeing Abigail's wisdom in a simple thing like that.
Like putting a small gift in a big box.
Correct. Now, there's some very interesting things to learn from this issue as well. She didn't have time to to bake bread and to eat. So she took the foods that were already set up for the shepherds that Naval was, remember they were having a feast for the shepherds, so she took that. And the cheapness and the fact that he was a cheapskate, Naval, look what he lost out. Because this wasn't a lot of food, or he could have given him much less food as to what he had to give, what Abigail ended up giving, which was a lot more. Now, the other thing is like this. How Abigail, of course, is a frum woman. So usually women, it's not proper for a woman to go out to give men food and drink. Usually men did that. Where do we learn that from? We learn it from Amoni velo Amonit, Moavi velo Moavit. Remember, in the Torah, as the Jewish people are traveling, trying to get into Eretz Yisrael, they pass through the lands of Ammon and Moab, and they don't give them food and drink. And when eventually the Torah writes, you're not allowed to marry Ammon and Moab, is because they were not koidem lechem umayim. They're not balei chesed. Avram Avinu genetically gives over to Klal Yisrael gemilas chasadim. You can't marry Ammon and Moab because they don't even have the basic gemilas chasadim in their genes. However, why Ein Chanami was the halacha Amoni velo Ammonit, that you can't marry an Ammonite man, but an Ammonite woman you could marry. Why? Because the women did not sin when they didn't go out and greet Klal Yisrael, because it's not proper for women to go out and greet Klal Yisrael. It's proper for men to go, but not women. So
it also says over here that she sent the servants out before her. So they were going to be, she wasn't going to be the first person they met.
And so so the shaila is, how did Abigail do it? Because since they were starving, it was a sakana nefashos, so she was allowed to do it.
Ernie, I think you can also understand it from all inheritance of the land went, with the exception of Benos Sloth, but it always went to the man, to the husband. So this was really something that she should have asked her husband for permission. Obviously, she didn't go to Novel to ask him for permission.
Right.
Well, she knew that he would,
But she knew.
he wouldn't go
would have
along
said
with
no,
the idea.
correct.
He would have said
Yes.
no.
By the way, there's a big halachic discussion regarding this. in the Noida B'Yehuda, the Tzlach, in Prague, 1790, 1810, about the same time the Chassam Sofer. The Noida B'Yehuda and Chassam Sofer are one of the first of the modern Achronim that deal with all sorts of issues that we in the modern world deal with. And they are one of the first Achronim. You go back to the Noida B'Yehuda, the Chassam Sofer, for a lot of things that the modern world began to deal with. So in the let's say a woman knows that her husband is stingy and that her husband is not giving tzedakah properly. And she's running the show. You know, my grandmother, Bluma Carniel, Alea Shalom, told me she lived in Sakul, Galicia, Sokol, which was a town of about 10,000 people, was not far from Belz. And they had a textile store where, you know, people would come in to buy textiles. This is in Sakul. And my grandmother told me that her father, Rav Usher Weber, would sit in the back of the store and learn. And the wife, she ran the whole store, and she had like an apron in front of her with money in it. And a whole day she gave out tzedakah from that thing. Why is that? Why am I mentioning that? So let's say you have a woman who's giving tzedakah, and the Baal is makpid. Can you accept tzedakah from that? Is it gezel? In fact, the Noida B'Yehuda says it's gezel, because she doesn't have the reshus to take from the Baal without him knowing, and it's certainly without approving it.
Yeah, but here in the case of Abigail, she was really repaying the shepherds who had watched and cared for Naval's flock.
So that's one of the tirutzim.
Yeah.
So first you have to ask the kasha. It's a kasha on Abigail. So number one, they want to say it's again, she's trying to save somebody's life.
I would think that more so. Ernie, do you have to pay someone? I was curious about that. Do you have to pay someone you haven't hired? They may have done a chesed, but they weren't hired. Is one obligated to pay people who have done you a service, even though they weren't hired?
It's a good question. It's a good question because they, certainly he would be going against halacha if he hired them and didn't pay them.
Right.
Here, as you say, David provided that service without necessarily being hired. But it's certainly enough because David could have argued, it was magia mi schar shmira as a methodology to avoid the fact that at least he could say that I'm not accepting gezel from Abigail who's taking my husband without knowing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Not only that, there's a takana of kol ma shekansa isha kana baila. Whatever, if a woman goes out to work, technically, Chachamim created. You see, the ksuba was a really amazing, innovative document because women were chattel in ancient society, Rome, Greece, but the ksuba gave a woman, if she was divorced by her husband or became a widow, a claim on a certain piece of land from the estate. She had first lien to that. So it was a financial instrument that protected women 2,000 years ago. So it's an amazing document. But the ksuba went, it was a quid pro quo. So for example, for the fact that a husband has to provide clothing and mazon for his wife, so he gets to keep her earnings. The fact that he has to provide other things, he has to redeem her from pirates if she's stolen. It's a quid pro quo relation. However, this concept of whatever a woman earns during the marriage, it's really belongs to the Baal. That's a later Takanim Rabbana that didn't exist at the time of David, is the way they want to answer as well. That came later. David is still working in an era where it didn't exist, that the schus Baal had schus in a nichse ishto. Others say that maybe this was assets that she brought into the marriage, which even after the takana, a husband could benefit by eating payros from fields that the wife brought into the marriage. but she had the right to give certain assets that she came in and she owned them herself. So what I'm saying is this sugya is brought by halachis in dealing with a lot of these issues. Pasuk Yutes. Vatomer linarea ivru lefanai. Like Ellen said, she told the youngsters to go in front of her. And I'll follow. Of course, she didn't tell the husband. Pasuk Chaf. She's riding on a donkey. V'yoredes b'seiser hahar, and she's coming in secret down the mountain. V'hinei David va'anashav yordim likrasa. David and his people are going towards her. V'tivgosh otam neimid. Rashi says, Gei haya ben shnei har, there was a valley between these two mountains. He yoredes mehar zev, hu yored mehar zeh shekenegdo. She came down one mountain towards him, and he came down the other mountain towards her. Say Chazal, in Psachim Gimel Amud Beis. Tanya Dvei Rabbi Shmuel, Lo'ilam Yisaper Adam B'Loshen Nekiya. When you speak, you should speak in clean language. So we know in the Torah it says
Inena tahara.
Nena Tahora instead of Tmeya. So even though the Torah is using extra letters, it would rather speak in a Loshen Nekiya. The Gemara says, Sharei B'Zav Karo Merkav. By a male person who has a seminal emission, whatever he sits on is called Merkav. Uvi'isha Kara Moshav. The word Merkav is Maguna, because Rechiva, Pisik Raglaim, see, the word Rechiva means you're sitting on a horse with your two legs open, straddling the horse. So we don't want to use that word related to a woman. It's not a Loshen Nekiya. Uvi'isha lo ksiv bo Merkav. Freit the Gemara v'haksiv ayayim rocheves ala chamor. If normally by women we don't use the word Merkav, how come over here we use the word Merkav? More answers, Hashem Mishum bi'ututa de Leila Orchahu. It's night. So she's afraid. In that setting, clinging onto a horse, riding the horse that way is the preferred way. The e-boy is same, if you don't like that answer, Mishum bi'ututa de Leila leka, Mishum bi'ututa David Ika. She was afraid about meeting it with David, and she could fall off, so she wanted to ride it in a straddle way. The boy said bituta the David nami leka. She wasn't afraid of David. It's mishum bituta the harika, but it was a very steep hill, and that's why it's used as. Okay, this has to stop. 1 second. Okay. You go.
Can you ride a donkey side saddle?
Yeah, it fall off.
Now, I want to read the Gemara. We just learned this in the Daf Yoimi, Megillah Yud Dalet. What's going on?
Okay, 1 second.
Excuse me, because let me just take this call. It's an emergency.
Put on mute.
Ellen, as far as what you said about the maidens going ahead of Abigail in order to, as a sign of her modesty, they also went ahead, just like the analogies to Yaakov Avinu. He sent his servants ahead with all the gifts to Esav when
Right.
they counted. It's the same thing. Kadem mishmiert noch dem mafut.
Mhm.
Grandfathers in general.
It's another interesting thing here in terms of all the food that Abigail sent. So the first thing she sent were was the bread, the wine, and the cooked meat. So those were prepared for immediate consumption. And the last three, toasted grain raisins and pressed figs, were processed so that they would not spoil in the desert heat. So she's a very seicheldik lady.
Why didn't I catch what you said?
Or weren't these, maybe these were the staples that were used in those times,
Yeah,
that they had the greatest longevity, they lasted the longest.
So she got them things that would satiate them immediately, and then
And sustain them further.
yeah.
Mhm. It is remarkable, I think, that she was able to do this, especially when someone's stingy, they tend to really be very meticulous about, anything that may be, taken
Extra.
away, or I mean,
Right.
the fact that she was able to do this in a very discreet way was remarkable.
Oh, she was really saving him.
Yes,
yeah.
and the family, the entire family.
How much is it?
She was also saving David, as you'll see later on in the parak,
Yes.
because she saw the nevuah that Naval was going to die through God's action rather than David
Right.
coming in and murdering him. Yeah,
Hmm.
How could she say?
Right.
the nevuah,
She was she was a prophetess.
right?
What do you mean she was a prophet?
Mhm. No,
She was one of the Neviot.
Barbara,
But,
what's the painting
later-
behind you?
But later on, she really doesn't say very nice things about it.
Yeah.
Let's not give away the whole story.
What's the story?
Oh, interesting here. According to the Arizal, Novel was a reincarnation of Bilam.
Mhm.
This is alluded to in the fact that the name Bilam has the same numerical value as Belial, 142.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Where are you reading that?
This is from,
Oh, I have that. I have that too.
Oh,
the art scroll. I have that. Yes, it's excellent. Really
Yeah.
quite good. Mhm. Mm.
I wonder what's going on.
Must be an emergency.
Huh?
I imagine.
Hi. Hi. So Ernie's mother's not doing well, so we have to like stop this now because we have to.